From an early age, Shmi Skywalker showed an unusual talent for the Force. Her connection was so intense that it didn't go unnoticed by Dooku, who saw in her a potential that could surpass many other Jedi. Determined to mold this young woman into a powerful guardian of peace, Dooku chose her as his apprentice. During her training, Shmi showed a rare balance between discipline and intuition, characteristics that made her not only an exceptional fighter, but also a source of wisdom and inspiration for other Jedi. Her connection with the Force was almost palpable, as if she channeled something beyond what was taught in the temples. Over time, Shmi excelled at complex missions and philosophical debates in the Jedi Temple. Like Qui-Gon Jinn, another of Dooku's disciples before her, she began to question certain tenets of the Jedi Order. Dooku's teachings not only encouraged the search for truth, but also challenged the rigidity of certain traditions. Shmi wasn't a rebel, but her ideas made some masters uncomfortable, while they fascinated others, like Qui-Gon. This characteristic of seeking a balance between tradition and innovation made her a unique Jedi. Then something extraordinary happened. Shmi realized she was pregnant, even though she had never broken the vows of the Jedi Order. This revelation deeply shook her confidence and called into question many of the values she believed she followed to the letter. For Shmi, this was a mystery that transcended simple explanations, a direct manifestation of the Force. The doubt and surprise in her eyes reflected the impact of something so great and unexpected. Her mind revolved around the implications of carrying a new life under such circumstances. When Shmi reported her situation to the Jedi Council, the reaction was divided. While some masters like Mace Windu and Ki-Adi-Mundi maintained a more skeptical stance, others, like Yoda, were open but reserved. Although she wasn't accused of violating the Order's vows, Shmi felt the weight of suspicious looks and murmurs echoing through the temple's corridors. The feeling of isolation followed her like a shadow, a constant reminder that, despite her achievements, she was now seen differently. Of all people, Dooku and Qui-Gon Jinn were the only ones who openly stood up for Shmi. Dooku, always paternal, insisted that pregnancy was a manifestation of the Force and should be treated with respect and caution. Qui-Gon, for his part, saw the event as a possible fulfillment of the Chosen One's prophecy, the one who would bring balance to the Force. His belief in Shmi's ability and his son's destiny was unshakable. More than allies, they were pillars that supported Shmi in a moment of vulnerability. It was Qui-Gon who first presented the prophecy theory to the Jedi Council. He argued that Shmi's pregnancy, which had occurred in such a unique way, could not be dismissed as a trivial event. The Council listened to his words, but remained ambivalent. Without clear evidence, they didn't reject the possibility, but they didn't embrace the idea with enthusiasm either. For Shmi, this neutrality only reinforced his perception that the Jedi Order was hesitant to deal with the unusual. Shmi's disappointment with the Order grew by the day. The lack of genuine support, coupled with the veiled distrust of many masters, led her to a difficult decision. She would walk away from the Jedi Order. She felt she needed to protect her son from an environment that, although it taught about peace and justice, was unable to fully accept what she represented. In her heart, Shmi knew she couldn't create this new life under Coruscant's judgmental gaze. Determined to help Shmi, Dooku suggested that she seek refuge away from the centers of Jedi power. Qui-Gon, sharing this vision, recommended a place where she could live in peace and raise her son in safety, away from the pressures of the Council. So Shmi left, leaving behind the grandeur of Coruscant to seek a future where she could shape her son according to her own values, far from the shadow of the Jedi Order. A few weeks after Anakin's birth, Shmi made a crucial decision: to settle on the moon of Endor. The tranquility of that place, surrounded by lush forests and inhabited by the Ewoks, seemed perfect for raising her son away from the pressures of the galaxy. Endor offered the peace and isolation she so desperately sought, allowing her to connect even more deeply with the Force and care for Anakin without outside interference. It was there, under the glow of the stars and the welcoming silence of nature, that she would begin a new phase of her life. Ever since she was pregnant, Shmi, with her unusual sensitivity to the Force, felt something special in Anakin. It was as if the Force flowed through him more intensely than she had ever felt before, even in other powerful Jedi she had met. This extraordinary connection wasn't just an intuition. Shmi could physically feel the vibrant energy emanating from her son, as if he were a catalyst for the living Force. This only reinforced her belief that he was destined for something great. As the months passed, the strength Shmi felt in Anakin seemed to grow exponentially. Even before he was a year old, there was something about him that transcended the ordinary. His presence was magnetic, almost mesmerizing, and Shmi noticed that he attracted small phenomena around him, like gentle breezes or objects that seemed to move slightly. It was as if the Force itself responded to his existence, making it impossible to ignore that boy's extraordinary potential. This force also manifested itself in his development. Anakin began to speak and walk much earlier than expected for a normal child. His words were clear and his balance impressive. Shmi watched in amazement as he explored his surroundings with a curiosity that seemed endless. Each new developmental milestone reinforced the feeling that Anakin was different, special, and that his connection to the Force influenced even his physical and mental growth. During her pregnancy, Shmi had devoted hours to studying everything she could about the Chosen One's prophecy. Using the knowledge she had acquired during her life as a Jedi, she immersed herself in the ancient texts and stories handed down by the Masters. The more she studied, the more convinced she became that Anakin was the embodiment of this prophecy. Every detail seemed to align with what she was experiencing, as if destiny was unfolding before her eyes. Anakin, as the son of the Force and of a sensitive as powerful as Shmi, was born with an unusual amount of midichlorians, even greater than in the original timeline. This abundance of connection to the Force not only made him unique, but also intensified Shmi's perception of the role he would play in the future. She knew that this was a great responsibility, but also a rare opportunity to shape someone who could change the course of the galaxy. Very early on, Anakin began to demonstrate extraordinary abilities. He moved small objects, often without realizing what he was doing, and his intuition was impressive. Even without any formal training, he was able to predict simple events, such as the arrival of a storm or the movement of an animal. For Shmi, this was proof that Anakin was light years ahead of other Force-sensitive children, which made her decide that he needed to be trained from an early age. Shmi's decision to start Anakin's training earlier than conventional was a bold one, but she believed it was the best thing to do. Unlike the Jedi who followed strict rules, she adapted the training to Anakin's needs and abilities, allowing him to learn at his own pace. Shmi believed that the Force was something to be understood and experienced, not just a tool for accomplishing missions. This approach allowed Anakin to explore his abilities naturally and intuitively. As a born questioner of the Jedi Order, Shmi decided to raise Anakin differently. She brought him up more freely, without the rigidity and control that she herself had experienced as a Jedi. For Shmi, it was important that Anakin understood that the Force was an ally, but that he also had the right to live as he wished. She encouraged him to dream of a normal life, with choices that even included starting a family, if that was what he wanted. This different upbringing meant that Anakin grew up with a more open mind than most Jedi. He was exposed to possibilities that the Order would never have allowed, which helped him develop a unique vision of the Force, the Jedi Order, and the Republic itself. Without the limitations imposed by Jedi dogma, Anakin had the space to question, create, and explore new paths, which would shape his perspective in a profoundly innovative way. Shmi, as a mother and a Jedi, understood that the Force had not chosen her by chance. She saw her mission not only as raising and protecting Anakin, but also as guiding him to fully become the Chosen One. To this end, Shmi decided to give special focus to Anakin's connection with the Force and to his emotional training. She knew that mastering the Force was not just a question of technique, but of inner balance. So she prioritized teaching him how to deal with his emotions, understand his feelings, and use the Force wisely. The fact that Anakin was being raised and trained by his own mother brought an emotional balance that few Jedi have ever had. Shmi, with her sensitivity and empathy, offered the emotional support he needed to face his challenges without succumbing to anger or fear. She realized that her maternal presence was fundamental to shaping a more centered Jedi, capable of understanding both the light and dark sides of the Force, without being consumed by either. This care formed the foundations of a young man with impressive emotional stability. In time, Shmi decided to tell Anakin who he really was and what his mission was. She explained the prophecy of the Chosen One and what it meant to bring balance to the Force. Although it was an immense responsibility for a young man, Shmi made him understand that he was not alone and that he would have support on his journey. This revelation not only shaped Anakin's purpose, but also made him mature more quickly, understanding the greatness of his role in the galaxy. Because she understood the complexity of the Force, Shmi decided that Anakin should know both sides, the light and the dark. She believed that only by understanding the dark side could Anakin overcome it and use it as a balancing tool. Under her supervision, he began to learn skills from the light side while understanding how the dark side worked, always with the aim of keeping it in check. This dual training allowed Anakin to gain a unique insight into the Force. While still a teenager, Anakin began to manifest abilities that surpassed even experienced Jedi. His ability to move gigantic objects, such as large rocks and entire trees, was impressive and frightening to his own master. Shmi, although proud, knew that she had to keep guiding him so that his abilities didn't overwhelm him. This raw power was clear evidence that he was unlike any other Jedi. In addition to his physical abilities, Anakin developed an even greater sensitivity to the Force. Not only did he have a keen intuition, but he began to foresee the future with a clarity that few Jedi could achieve. At times, his visions were so precise that he was able to anticipate important events and make decisions based on these perceptions. For Shmi, this was further confirmation that Anakin was destined to be the greatest Jedi the galaxy had ever known. Faced with this extraordinary development, Shmi decided it was time for Anakin to meet Dooku, his former master. She believed that Dooku could offer a new perspective to Anakin's training and help him refine his skills even further. When they arrived in Dooku's presence, he was struck by the intensity of Anakin's connection with the Force. He saw something in the young man that he had never seen before, something that intrigued and fascinated him. To test Anakin's potential, Dooku invited him to a duel. The fight was intense, but it was clear to Dooku that the boy possessed impressive skills, even without the formal training of a Jedi of the Order. Anakin's every move showed not only power, but also intelligence and control. For Dooku, there was no longer any doubt. He was facing the Chosen One, the one who would bring balance to the Force, as the prophecy said. At the time, Dooku was already a disciple of Darth Sidious, although Shmi didn't know it. He saw such great potential in Anakin that he decided to suggest that the young man spend some time at his side. Despite an initial instinct to be cautious, Shmi trusted her former master and believed that he could help Anakin grow. So she accepted the offer, allowing Anakin to learn from Dooku, unaware of the hidden intentions behind it. With this decision, Anakin began to spend more time with Dooku, who watched him closely as he taught him advanced skills. The young man, now surrounded by diverse influences, was at a crucial point in his journey. Shmi, although confident in her upbringing and the teachings she had given Anakin, could not fully foresee the impact that Dooku and his intentions could have on her son's future. Dooku, with the respect he always had for Shmi, regarded her as a daughter and therefore developed a special fondness for Anakin. He saw in the boy not only a future powerful Jedi, but also someone who could share his own power and vision for the galaxy. During the weeks they spent together, Dooku taught Anakin about the dark side of the Force, showing him how this power could be used impressively, albeit cautiously. His aim was not to convert him yet, but to plant seeds that could germinate and be useful to him in the future. Even without trying to convince Anakin directly, Dooku introduced ideas and concepts about the dark side in an almost natural way. He talked about the power of mastering emotions, such as anger and fear, and how these feelings could be channeled into strength. All this was done in a subtle way, always suggesting that Anakin could one day make choices for himself. More than a temporary master, Dooku seemed to be molding the young man to become a valuable ally for him and his master, Darth Sidious. Anakin, for his part, was not intimidated by mentions of the dark side. He had already been introduced to the concept by his mother, who spoke about it in a more careful and modest tone. So hearing Dooku broach the subject in such an open and even seductive way didn't come as a shock to the young man. In fact, he began to understand that the Force as a whole was more complex than the Jedi had traditionally taught. For Anakin, this seemed to be another part of his apprenticeship. During the weeks he spent with Dooku, Anakin developed a strong friendship and complicity with the Count. In addition, his skills as a warrior evolved impressively. Under Dooku's guidance, he perfected combat techniques and learned strategies that few Jedi Masters could teach. Each day of training seemed to be worth years of learning, and Anakin absorbed everything with frightening ease, as if the Force was guiding his every move. When Anakin returned to Endor with Shmi, it seemed as if years had passed since he left. The transformation was visible. He was now a true combat prodigy, a fighting machine with a connection to the Force that seemed to know no bounds. Shmi marveled at her son's progress, but was also intrigued by the depth of knowledge Dooku had imparted about the dark side. Something inside her began to raise suspicions about her former master. Anakin told her everything he had learned from Dooku, from combat techniques to teachings about the dark side. This made Shmi think even more about Dooku's possible involvement with the Sith. The clarity and intensity of the teachings on the dark side didn't seem to be just academic. Still, she couldn't ignore the positive results that this training had brought to her son. Anakin was now more powerful and wiser than ever. It was clear to Shmi that the Force had guided Anakin's steps meticulously. The fact that he had been born of her, a powerful sensitive and trained by Dooku, a questioning master with vast knowledge, seemed to be part of a greater plan. Everything indicated that Anakin was destined to absorb knowledge and skills from different sources, transcending the limits imposed by Jedi tradition. Training with Dooku was one of the pillars that shaped Anakin, giving him a broader view of the Force. Although he didn't know that Dooku was a disciple of Darth Sidious, Anakin absorbed the teachings of the dark side without prejudice, something that would prepare him to deal with future challenges in a unique way. He didn't see the dark side as something purely evil, but as a tool that required balance and self-control. With time and the practice of everything he learned from both Shmi and Dooku, Anakin began to stand out as a perfect warrior. His mother had provided a rare emotional balance, while Dooku had refined his combat skills and broadened his knowledge of both sides of the Force. This combination resulted in a young man with an unprecedented connection to the Force, capable of performing feats that no Jedi before him had ever managed. During one of his meditations, which were getting deeper and more intense, Anakin had a vision. It wasn't the first time it had happened, but this one was different. He saw a confrontation, a crucial moment involving a Jedi he didn't know, but whose name echoed in his mind: Obi-Wan Kenobi. This vision made him uneasy because it seemed like a warning, a call to something that was about to happen and that would change the course of events. Anakin went up to Shmi and asked, "Who is Obi-Wan Kenobi?" The question took Shmi by surprise, but she answered calmly, "Obi-Wan is a Jedi, a little younger than me. He was a disciple of Qui-Gon Jinn, who was, along with my master Dooku, the only ones who openly supported me when I got pregnant with you." Shmi paused, lost for a moment in the memories of her old friends, but then asked, "Why do you want to know my son?" Anakin answered seriously, "I saw him in a vision, fighting Master Dooku in a place called Geonosis." The mention of Geonosis made Shmi uneasy. The fact that Anakin saw Dooku facing a Jedi like Obi-Wan was worrying. Dooku had been Qui-Gon's master, and his relationship with the Order had always been one of respect, even if he was a staunch questioner. But if this vision was true, Shmi's suspicions that Dooku had turned to the dark side became almost a certainty. Anakin's vision was a clear sign that something very serious was about to happen. Shmi contacted the Jedi Council and reported what Anakin had seen. Master Mace Windu confirmed that Obi-Wan was indeed on Geonosis investigating suspicious activity and had just requested reinforcements. Concerned about the danger he might be in, Shmi insisted that action had to be taken quickly. Anakin, sensing that his intuition was guiding him, said he should go too. Shmi hesitated, but she knew her son's sensitivity and decided to trust him, setting off together for Geonosis. When they arrived on Geonosis, they found a battle taking place in a large arena. Shmi saw Jedi fighting an army of droids, but his gaze was quickly drawn to a vehicle that was moving away from the arena. It was Dooku. Anakin felt he had to follow him. "Let me go alone, Mom," he ordered, with unwavering determination. Shmi, fully trusting Anakin's intuition, agreed and went down to help the Jedi in the arena while he set off after Dooku. Following Dooku with his connection to the Force as his guide, Anakin arrived at an isolated cave. There, he found exactly the scene he had seen in his vision. Dooku facing Obi-Wan Kenobi in fierce combat. The Jedi was at a disadvantage and, in one swift movement, Dooku hit Obi-Wan's leg, causing him to fall. Anakin approached and asked, "Master, what are you doing?" Dooku turned, surprised, and replied, "Anakin, what are you doing here?" Obi-Wan, who was watching the scene, was confused to see the young man. It was then that Anakin explained that he had had a vision of that moment and that his mother, Shmi Skywalker, had taken him there. Obi-Wan immediately recognized his old friend's name and understood who the young man in front of him was. If Qui-Gon is right, he is the chosen one, Obi-Wan thought, impressed. Dooku, for his part, just smiled and said, "Young man, there is much you do not yet know. The Jedi Order is corrupted. Come with me, and I will introduce you to my master." Anakin stared at Dooku and asked, "Your master? Have you become a Sith?" Dooku calmly replied, "The Force is greater than the limits imposed by the Jedi. Look what you've already learned from me. This is only the beginning. Join me and become the most powerful Sith Lord who ever lived." Anakin, without hesitation, switched on his lightsaber and replied, "Out of respect for what you have taught me and my mother, I will let you go. But if you try to hurt him again, this will be your last battle." Dooku was visibly surprised by Anakin's firm attitude. He hadn't expected such a promising young man to be able to challenge him with such conviction. With a slight smile on his face, Dooku replied, "Watch your arrogance, young man. Do you really think you can stand up to me? There's still a lot to learn." But Anakin remained motionless, his gaze fixed and determined. His posture made it clear that he would not back down, even in the face of someone as powerful as the Count. After a brief pause, Dooku continued, "You have a great future, Anakin. Your determination and confidence are admirable, but be careful that your arrogance doesn't blind you. Out of respect for your mother and what we have lived through together, I will let you live." He switched off his lightsaber, turned and started to leave the cave, before disappearing into the darkness. He looked at Anakin one last time and said, "See you soon." Anakin didn't reply, but remained attentive until Dooku was out of sight. Anakin then turned his attention to Obi-Wan, who was still on the ground, wounded. "So you're Shmi Skywalker's son?" said Obi-Wan with a slight smile. Anakin, returning the gesture, replied, "Yes, it's a pleasure." Obi-Wan, even in pain, kept his tone friendly. "It's my pleasure, boy. You saved me, I owe you." Anakin helped Obi-Wan to his feet, offering support, while Shmi and Yoda arrived on the scene. Shmi looked at Anakin and asked, "Are you all right? What happened?" Obi-Wan, still leaning on the young man's shoulder, replied in a relaxed tone, "Your son just put a Sith Lord on the run, Shmi." Shmi smiled slightly at Obi-Wan's attempt to ease the tension, but his expression soon turned serious. "So he really did become a Sith?" he asked, already knowing the answer. Anakin confirmed with a nod, and Yoda thoughtfully muttered, Strange, today was the day. In the shadows, a great Jedi has fallen. But another great one is emerging." Yoda then looked at Shmi and added, "Present your son to the council, you should, young Skywalker." Shmi nodded, visibly moved, and replied, "It would be an honor, Master." When they all arrived on Coruscant, Shmi hesitated for a moment before entering the Jedi Council room. As they waited to be called, she recalled the day she had stood in that same place, years before, trying to convince the Masters that she was carrying the Chosen One in her womb. At the time, her words had been met with skepticism, but now, looking at Anakin, she knew that her faith had been rewarded. Her heart was filled with pride and relief. As soon as they were called, Obi-Wan, now a council master, took the floor. "Welcome, my friend," he said with a warm smile. "I'd like to thank you again for your help on Geonosis, especially the young man at your side." He looked at Anakin, who returned the smile. Yoda then intervened. "Young Skywalker, meet the boy next to you. The council would like that." Shmi stepped forward and began to speak. "A few years ago, I stood here in this very place, believing that I was carrying the Chosen One in my womb. Today I am certain." Her firm voice left everyone in the room in absolute silence. Anakin looked at Shmi in surprise as she continued. "This is Anakin Skywalker, my son, my former Padawan, now a Jedi." The air in the room became heavy, and the masters looked at each other. Mace Windu took the lead and said, "Congratulations, young Skywalker. The Order and this council owe you much." He looked at Shmi and added, "To you." Shmi smiled discreetly, grateful for the recognition. Mace Windu then continued, "We respect your decision to remain outside the Order, Shmi, but we would like to invite you to return." Shmi replied calmly, "Today I understand that it was the Force itself that took me out of the Order. In order for Anakin to be prepared, he needed to be trained away from here. It was destiny that he should know both the light and dark sides, but belong to neither." His words left the masters puzzled, but also impressed. Windu turned to Anakin and asked, "Now that you are a Jedi Knight, you must make your own decisions. What do you say, young Skywalker?" Anakin replied calmly and with conviction, "I agree with my mother's vision, but I would be honored to help the Order whenever they need me." Mace looked at Yoda, who gave a slight smile. "We will, young Skywalker," replied Windu. "All indications are that a war is coming." Meanwhile, in a distant place, Dooku was returning to Darth Sidious's hideout. "The boy, my disciple's son, is ready, Master," said Dooku. Palpatine, with an evil smile, replied, "Very well. We have a war ahead of us, and he must come over to our side as soon as possible. Everything is going according to plan. The game was just beginning." The Clone Wars began, and both Anakin and Shmi were quickly invited to join the battlefront alongside the Jedi. For the Council, this was the perfect opportunity to evaluate Anakin in action, understanding the real impact of his extraordinary abilities. Shmi, on the other hand, was seen as a strategist capable of balancing the use of the Force with her experience as a teacher and Jedi, making her an indispensable ally on the battlefield. Anakin, now on missions alongside the Jedi, showed all the potential he had developed throughout his training. His unparalleled mastery of the Force, both light and dark, impressed his allies and intimidated his enemies. The lessons taught by Shmi and Dooku molded him into a warrior who transcended the conventional limitations of a Jedi. The Council began to realize that Anakin was indeed the Chosen One. Anakin's impact on the battles was so great that the Jedi Council had no doubts about his importance. He was incomparable in his handling of the lightsaber, the speed of his movements, and his complete mastery of the Force. His presence completely unbalanced the battlefield, turning seemingly impossible confrontations into decisive victories. Anakin's every move in the Clone Wars was further proof that he was not just a Jedi, but a true prodigy. In addition to his combat skills, Anakin's ability to predict enemy movements and discern complex strategies made him a key player in the course of the war. His unique connection to the Force allowed him to anticipate enemy actions with surgical precision. However, while the Jedi saw him as a powerful weapon to end the conflict, Palpatine began to see him as the next great Sith Lord. The Chancellor was already drawing up plans to shape Anakin's future according to his dark interests. Palpatine, sensing Anakin's growing prominence, decided to put him to the ultimate test. The plan was cruel: kidnap Shmi and have Dooku kill her, sending Anakin into a spiral of hatred and revenge. Emotional manipulation would be the trigger to bring him over to the dark side, presenting Palpatine as a figure of power and influence while blaming the Jedi for the war and the young man's suffering. After locating Shmi, Dooku and Palpatine gathered a disproportionate force to attack her. The Jedi who were with her were quickly eliminated, leaving her alone and trapped. Face to face with Dooku and Palpatine, Shmi remained calm, even in the face of imminent danger. Dooku, trying to convince her to surrender, said, "Surrender, Shmi. No one will hurt you. But her response was firm. "Why, Master?" Dooku replied, "The dark side offers something you'll never find with the Jedi. One day you will understand. Now hand me your saber." Shmi, knowing he had no chance against Dooku and Darth Sidious, handed over his saber. Palpatine then ordered Dooku, "Well done. Now kill her." Dooku stared in awe at Palpatine, not believing what he was hearing. Dooku's hesitation was visible. He looked at Palpatine and then at Shmi, unable to obey. "Do it now," Palpatine shouted, impatient. Just then a voice echoed through the room. "Get away from her." Everyone turned towards the entrance, where Anakin appeared, imposing, with his lightsaber activated. Anakin sensed that his mother was in danger and followed his intuition to where his mother was. Palpatine, sensing Dooku's hesitation, decided to act. He lifted Shmi into the air with the Force, strangling her while saying to Anakin, "The dark side is your destiny." But Anakin, in a reflexive act, did the same to Palpatine, lifting him by the neck with the Force. The action caused Shmi to fall unconscious to the ground. In response, Palpatine threw Force lightning at Anakin, who defended with his saber while continuing to lift him. With a sudden movement, Anakin threw Palpatine to the ground with all his strength, the sound of the impact echoing around the room. The sound of Palpatine's bones breaking was unmistakable, but he was still alive, immobilized. Without wasting any time, Anakin ran to his mother and confirmed that she was still breathing. With the reassurance of knowing that Shmi was alive, he stood up and, determined, went to Dooku. Dooku, shaken by Palpatine's betrayal and Anakin's fury, hesitated. He knew that the young man in front of him was no longer the apprentice he had trained, but a warrior shaped by the Force in its purest state. So he moved determinedly towards Dooku. Dooku raised his hands in a gesture of surrender, trying to buy time as he said, "Wait, young man. I wouldn't kill you. We don't have to face each other." But Anakin was unwilling to listen. His steady gaze conveyed determination. "You've killed too many people in this war. You've chosen your side and put my mother's life at risk. It's going to end here." Without hesitation, Anakin lunged forward with his lightsaber at high speed. Dooku, realizing that there was no avoiding the confrontation, activated his own saber and moved into a defensive position. The tension in the air was almost tangible, with the sound of sabers cutting through the space between them. The fight that followed was brutal. Dooku, even though he was an experienced duelist, found it difficult to keep up with the intensity of Anakin's blows. Each of the young man's attacks seemed to carry the weight of years of training and repressed anger. Dooku retreated with each strike, trying to find a gap, but Anakin gave no room. His strength, speed, and mastery of the Force, anticipating his movements, were overwhelming. Dooku tried to use his most refined combat technique to throw Anakin off balance, but the young man, guided by an almost instinctive precision, adapted quickly, maintaining the advantage. With a swift and accurate blow, Anakin managed to disarm Dooku, sending his former master's saber flying. Dooku, now disarmed, slowly backed away, realizing that Anakin intended to kill him. In a last-ditch effort, he emanated Force lightning in the young man's direction. Anakin, unfazed, switched off his saber and raised his hand, returning them with even more intensity. The room was illuminated by an explosion of energy, and Anakin increased the power of his rays until they hit Dooku directly. In a matter of seconds, Dooku's body was disfigured, lifeless and lying on the floor. Anakin then turned to Palpatine, who was still alive but visibly weakened. His bones were broken and he was struggling to breathe. Before Anakin could make any decisions, Mace Windu and Yoda arrived on the scene, watching in amazement. Windu looked at Palpatine and said, "So the Chancellor was the Sith Lord?" Anakin replied calmly, "It seems the Force wants him to stay alive. The Republic will know who he really is, and I hope he spends the rest of his life trapped in this frail body, if he manages to survive." Turning his attention to his mother, Anakin placed a hand on her forehead, using the Force to revive her. Shmi opened her eyes slowly, confused, and asked, "Are you all right?" Anakin smiled and replied, "Yes, and you?" She nodded, still a little dizzy, as she looked around and saw the bodies of Dooku and Palpatine. Anakin helped her up and led her out of the room, while Yoda and Windu watched the scene in silence. Windu, impressed, said to Yoda, "That boy won the war for us." Yoda, with his usual tone of wisdom, replied, "The role of the chosen one, young Skywalker, has fulfilled." After the events, Palpatine was tried and sentenced to life imprisonment, kept alive by devices that sustained him in his weakened state. The fall of the most powerful Sith brought relief to the galaxy, but also served as a reminder of the darkness that had almost consumed everything. The Republic began a process of rebuilding, seeking the peace that had long since disappeared. Meanwhile, Anakin and Shmi continued to help the Jedi Order, but remained independent Jedi, maintaining their freedom and autonomy. With the end of the Clone Wars and the fall of Palpatine, the galaxy finally found peace. The balance of the Force, which seemed to be just a distant prophecy, became a reality through Anakin Skywalker. He not only fulfilled his role as the Chosen One, but also paved the way for a new era of understanding and harmony between the Jedi and the Force. Light and darkness, finally balanced, brought hope to a universe that had long lived in the shadows.